welcome to today's webinar on personal wellness. If you don't know me, I'm Sean English, along with my co-partner in crime here, Mark Russo. We'll be hosting today's seminar with Dr. Erika Chiappini. Hopefully I'm saying that right.
You did great.
So Dr. Chiappini is actually, it's actually when we set up this and talked about this a few days ago, I've never said her last name. And part of that reason is that she's part of our family, really. Probably about 4 years ago, my son's a senior in high school right now. 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, he was a freshman and had a lot of anxieties and some built up issues that he just kind of didn't have anybody to talk to and didn't feel like he did, and ended up where he kind of took his actions, got in trouble at school, basically got in a fight, took a kid down and got, frustrated with some actions and ended up where he needed to, the school recommended him having a behavioral coach and kind of somebody that he could talk to. So we were, thank goodness, introduced to Erika, and that is how I know Erika is really is we talk probably every other week, every month at the worst, as she talks to my son Grant and kind of helps him get through some emotional times that he has. So, it's one of those things that I'm going to look at everybody here and say that, hey, we all have issues in our lives, and how we handle them sometimes is different. But we've got Erika here to hopefully help us understand, to identify when other people are having stressors, when we're having stressors, and what behaviors we can do to help ourselves as well as help our friends. I know here in the PGA section, your board of directors is very high on keeping in communication with everybody. We want to make sure that if we try to call around and talk to guys and just kind of say hi to everybody and see what everybody is, how everybody's doing. I'm going to point out to one of my best buddies there. We have Mr. Hutzel on the line, and David's went through a life-changing experience in the last, year and a half. And, we always check in with him and try to make sure how he's doing. And if we can all be like him with him handling this, that would be incredible. So, but basically turn it over to Erika, and Erika is a assistant professor at Johns Hopkins and a behavioral psychologist. I think a child behavioral psychologist is I think is what what she is called. But Erika, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and let you go.
Perfect. Well, Sean and everybody else, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to talk with you a little bit about some of the things that I find interesting, and I tried to make it a little bit golf friendly, although I'm not going to lie, it's not my field, but I'll be very curious about the questions that you have. So I'm a child psychologist by training, but as part of that, I deal with parents. And so grown-ups have problems too. And so I'm often tackling those as I'm helping their kids as well. And so my goal today is to really just kind of coach you through, what does it look like when we're feeling stressed? What does it look like when we feel more than stress? And how to seek help, and things that you can just kind of do in your day-to-day life to help you do what you want to do. Hold on, I meant to share my screen first there. I am also happy to answer questions as we go. I have slides, but please just chime into the chat, and hopefully Sean and others can help me organize those when they happen. And we can kind of get started. All right, can you guys see what I see?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned, these are the kind of the topics that we'll go through today. And so we'll just kind of start really broad. So what does mental health mean? It is kind of a word or a term that we use to, talk about a lot of different components of our day-to-day lives. So from the choices that we make, not just like food choices, let's say, but just kind of like, who are we spending our time with? What do we do day to day? how are we getting by, things like that to kind of keep us on our A game as best as we can. It of course also includes things like emotions and stress, and how we're handling those, what kinds of things are triggering them, kind of the attitudes or the lens that we tend to look through the world through, right? So like, do we tend to look through things on the sunny side, or do we tend to have more of a pessimistic view about things? Though all those kinds of thoughts can influence how well we're doing, or how we interpret and act on certain situations that we encounter.
Hey, Erica, go ahead and spread. I think you're still on the first slide, and just kind of click that to make that bigger where everybody can see that your slides.
This one?
Yeah, right now you're on your header. You're still on your header, and you're still in the. Yep, you're still in the first screen.
Yeah, just go up to slide. Go up to slideshow, I think, Erica.
Yeah, let me redo here. Okay, let's see. Whoop. All right, now do you see this one with the heart?
We're on this. What's the slide below that? The what are stressors? Okay. And it's still in PowerPoint, like the main screen.
Eric, if you go up to slideshow up there on top and just start slideshow, it may just click in. I think sometimes it gets a little wonky like this.
From my usual. Okay, let's see. How about now?
I think we're seeing your second monitor versus your screen.
All right, look at this. A perfect example of a stressor, right? Let's see what we can do here. We might just have to go like a little wonky. Okay, let's try this. Oops, now I lost the Zoom. Here we go. Okay, now what do you see?
Your
the title?
Title slide.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have like 3 different screens and they all show different things. Okay.
Yeah. What are stressors? Question mark.
Some of my very exciting animations are going to be ruined, but that's okay. All right. So anyway, but also in our mental health, we have our relationships, our social connections, and just like I mentioned, kind of our day-to-day activity.
We lose her.
I think so.
All right. Am I back?
You're back. Yeah.
All right. Unplugged my monitor, so hopefully this works.
Yeah. What are stressors?
What are stressors? All right. And now we're there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Woo. All right. Problem solved. Don't get technologically fancy is what I've just learned. All right, so when we're thinking about stressors, there's lots of different kinds that we have in mind. Some are the obvious ones, right? So like something kind of terrible has happened to either us or someone that we care deeply about. And that can be, if we're having financial difficulties, relationship difficulties, if we're experiencing different kinds of discrimination, or just, our workload has really increased, things like that. But I think the other category of stressors that happen that don't necessarily kind of register the same way are good things that are happening to us. And so this can be things like getting a new job, getting promoted, having a new baby, moving, a new exciting season coming up, things like that. And really what kind of makes a stressor is like when there's been a big change to our routine, right? So like we have to change the way we're doing things day to day. And as humans, we tend to really love routine. And so when that gets shifted, our bodies tend to kind of take that on and say like, oh, something's different here. What are we going to do about this? And so stressors can be big things. They can also be just like daily pressures that we might encounter, right? So like, I got to get this done. I have this really long to-do list that I have to tackle. And so we really want to make sure that we kind of have a strategic way to approach these situations so that we can prevent them from taking a toll on ourselves. And usually the more of these stressors that we're experiencing, the more stress we're going to feel. And that's why I really like to pull in the positive ones, because you might, it might be obvious that you're, not getting along with your coworkers, but if you're also moving and, have a new family member joining, then like those are going to take their toll as well. So when we have kind of stressors, when we encounter them, it triggers a stress response in our body. So our brain first says, uh-oh, something's here. I need to take care of this. This is some kind of threat, whether it's, an actual threat or something that's just, not actually dangerous, but can still throw us off kilter. That then kicks off, their stress hormones get released into our body through our adrenal glands. And then that has this kind of wide ranging impact on our body. So we get the fight, flight, or freeze response is what I often like to say, as many people when they're feeling stressed out or anxious might not know what to do and kind of feel frozen. And so I like to include that in there too. Stress can take a toll in many different ways. So we have how our body actually responds to those things, how we feel, and then the things that we do. Stress is actually a useful emotion for us to have and to experience, because without stress, we would not get things done and we wouldn't be able to protect ourselves. So it's not about getting rid of stress. It's just about making sure that the volume is not turned up too loud, or that if the alarm gets triggered, that we know how to kind of turn it off or to make it less, bold to us. So what does stress look like both in ourselves, and then some of these things you might see in others too. And so stress can really impact kind of all components of our body. So it messes with our sleep, makes things hard. It makes it hard to concentrate. We might get headaches, muscle aches, messes up our GI system. We feel more tired. We get a lot of chest things going on. I found this quote this morning from the Golf Journal about how stress can impact your play too, which I thought was really interesting, and that it can kind of goes all the way down to the level of changing how you might swing or like actually kind of carry out an action in something that you love so much. And so it's really important that we're kind of that we know when we're feeling stressed and that we know what to do with it when it happens. Mood wise, of course, stress can have lots of different kinds of impact. So it can make us feel more anxious, depressed, get more irritable. We might feel really overwhelmed or restless. And then we might enter into these kind of different thought patterns that may not be so helpful. And when we get stuck in this cycle of different kinds of thoughts, it's kind of hard to get out. But then the more that we have these kinds of thoughts, the more likely we are to have similar thoughts. And so we really want to be able to tune into that channel in our brains to turn that off. Or just recognize when we're in those places, so that way we can do something differently to get us out of that kind of stress mode that we might have. Stress can also impact our behavior in lots of different ways. And sometimes the behaviors are the things that others are most likely to notice, even if you don't necessarily know that you're stressed yourself just yet. So you might notice changes to your eating patterns. You might get more irritable or kind of have these angry outbursts. You might use drugs or alcohol in a way that's not so, helpful, but for coping is the kind of the intended purpose. Withdraw from things that you love to do. Avoid doing things that you need to do. And then it might, kind of on like a daily hygiene aspect, it might kind of take away from some of those things too. So like you're not taking as good of care of yourself either. You might also notice changes to like how you might usually do things. So falling behind, and then your performance, like for example, in golf might start to like take a hit. So things that used to be really easy for you might become a little bit more challenging. In others, what we're really looking for is these, and Sean was telling me that a lot of you also kind of coach, teens and other adults and things like that. And so things that you might see in those roles with people that you have pretty regular contact with are these sudden changes in behavior. So usually they're, like a nice, kind, reliable person. And then all of a sudden something is going awry and they're, kind of not as dependable as they once were, or they're getting much more frustrated more easily. And these could be signs that like, okay, maybe there's something going on in their lives that is kind of contributing to this. And so those are the things to kind of keep an eye out for in others who may be experiencing more stress as well. I put these pictures of Michaela Schifrin, and then I tried to make this video. Like I said, don't get fancy with technology when you're doing a talk, but of just like people who have, clearly really good skills who are just missing the mark at the moment that matters the most. And it could be because they've, something else is going on either outside of that we're just not, familiar with, or they had kind of unhelpful thought patterns right before these things that might have impacted how things played out. It's always tricky, especially in my field. One of the things that we often are dealing with is that, people feel like they should be able to take care of themselves by themselves. And so it kind of, there's this big stigma around seeking help for things that you feel like you should be able to do on your own. And so what often happens is that people struggling with stress or other things that we'll talk about in a little bit often aren't talking about their problems and not sharing with others because of this feeling that they have to do it themselves. You might also have thoughts that like it's okay for other people to feel stressed and to get help for it, but this is something that I need to do, or like it's not that bad. I don't need to get somebody else involved. Or some perspectives of like if I may be weak if I have some kind of mental health difficulties going on, if I can't handle my stress. Or having this like perception that like you want to look like you have things together. And so being able to, or having someone kind of help you out with that can be counter to that. And so those are some of the thoughts that we're working with.
Hey, Erika.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this has changed a little bit though, say over the last 18 months to 2 years? Because it seems like people are openly, especially athletes, openly talking about
Yes.
anxiety and stress way more openly than was ever previously, maybe they were previously comfortable doing.
Yes, no, I 100% agree with that. I think that there is starting to be this change that people are becoming more open about some of the struggles that they're having. And I think that's going to be a really, really helpful thing, especially to have people at such a high level in their, their sport, to be able to say like, these are things that I struggle with, and this is how I cope with this. And like, I reached out for help, and this is what got me through. I think really trickles down to, the people that we encounter day to day too. And so my hope is that with that kind of more openness that everybody's going through this, that it should become less stigmatizing for people to talk about that. So I like the direction of that's going. And related to that too. So I think the other thing is to like kind of normalize that like everybody goes through difficult times. There's no way we can go through our lives and not and be happy 100% of the time. Like we're all going to lose somebody. Something's not going to go away. We're going to encounter some major disappointment. Like that's just a matter of life. And so being able to say like, hey, this thing happened to you. That seems like it would be really hard. How are you holding up with that is really the smallest step that you can do to kind of help somebody feel like, oh, okay, people do care how I'm doing. And I don't have to be, I don't have to put on this happy face 100% of the time. So a lot of, and I think one of the other things about COVID too, that I think has been helpful is that there's been much more awareness about how are we handling stress, because this is a stressor that 100% of the people on this world have encountered basically. And so there's lots of these good, kind of how do we handle stress? And so these are some of the good ones that we'll talk a little bit more about. But really it kind of come down to making sure that you're building in time for yourself to like refill your tank, right? So if you're constantly, as they say, pouring from an empty cup, it's going to run out eventually. And so you have to keep it full. And that's going to look different for different people, right? That might mean making sure, you spend the last hour before bed just like doing absolutely nothing. Or that might mean like, going out with friends every once in a while or things like that to just kind of make sure that your cup is full. So that way you can handle whatever life is going to throw your way. So to get a little bit more concrete about some of the steps for handling our stress, one of the simplest but can be the most powerful is to just name your feelings. So saying, I feel stressed right now, or I feel really irritated. And the reason that works so well is that it takes away some of the uncontrollability that our feelings can have on us, right? So like if our emotions are a roller coaster, we want to be in the front seat driving it. We're still on the ride and we can't necessarily help that part of it, but we don't want to just be like caught off guard. And so even just naming it can take some of that power back to say like, okay, yes, this is stress. Now I know what to do with that. But if it's just, for just like, I'm not sleeping and I'm not eating and I feel cranky all the time, that can kind of be a little harder to feel like I don't have any control over this. And so being able to name it for what it is can help with that. Some of the other things are just maintaining a healthy, regular lifestyle. So keeping to your daily routines, staying relatively consistent with your sleep and wake times, when you're eating meals, getting ready, choosing things that are going to fuel your body, making sure you're getting enough sleep every night, and then getting out and exercising are all things that can help. And I would even say if you know that there's a big stressor that's going to come up, right? So like, I know it's winter time now, but like I'm sure golf season is going to start as the weather returns. And I know I have a friend in the audience who is a golf pro somewhere else too. So I know what that looks like on the other side a little bit from his wife. But it's like, okay, I need to prioritize sleep when this change happens, because that is going to, even though this is a very exciting time, there's going to be things that I need to do to help me stay on track. And so kind of prioritizing those things to keep you on the right path.
Erika, would you say though, like when you're talking about sleep, I mean, everybody thinks that they need, for an example, for me, I mean, I know that I wear a Whoop band, which kind of measures my sleep and the amount of sleep that I have and so forth, that I always thought I had needed 7.5 hours of sleep is what I felt. But then when I started wearing this Whoop band, 8.5 hours is what I needed on especially on a stressful day. How much does people really aware of how can you tell a little bit with your sleep? I mean, that's obviously too really one of those things where if you're not getting enough sleep, that can set you up for a bad day. Can you kind of go in a little bit of the sleep side of it a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think you kind of hit there's like a nice thing that you said there, right? Is like, we have this perception that we only need this amount of sleep, but when we're counting in our heads too, right? It's like, for me, like I try to get into bed by 10:30 each night so I can wake up by 6:30, right? So like I'm giving myself 8 hours of sleep opportunity, but like, do I always make it by 10:30? No, it takes a while to fall asleep, right? So I'm probably only getting about 7 hours each night. And I can tell when I need to bump that up earlier, because I mean, there's the obvious signs, right? Like if you're doing kind of mindless or menial tasks, like you might actually feel sleepy and like you just can't keep your eyes open. And so like, that's a good sign that you're probably not getting quite enough. But I think other things too, is that there's some research that shows that even just getting like 15 minutes more of sleep can like make your reaction times faster, which I imagine is like very helpful in the sports/golf world, right? Where you're, trying to like work on your aim and like, hit things at a certain speed or like, with a certain amount of power, things like that. And so you might not be able to notice those small changes, but they can build up over time. And so I think something like a Whoop band or like a Fitbit can kind of help you see like, like how, just kind of like keeping a schedule of like, how much sleep am I regularly getting? And then being a little bit more intentional about, okay, last night I got 7 hours. This is how I felt the next day. And then this night I got 8 hours. This is how I felt. And so kind of doing some almost like self-experiments to see what's going to be your peak performance in some ways.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think sleep is one of my favorite things to talk about because it really impacts kind of everything that we do. And so just I should put a slide for this too, but I'll just kind of walk you guys through it. Some of the best things to do for your sleep are to keep your wake times within about 2 hours if you can. So if you're waking up at 6 on the weekend or on the weekdays, you don't want to sleep much past 8 on the weekends. Being a parent myself, I know I have no say in about sleeping in, but like for our teenagers and things like that, right? Like we often see them waking up at 6 or 6:30 for the school days. And then on the weekends, they're like sleeping until like 11, 12, 1. And really all that's doing is like giving them jet lag for the weekend that they then have to recover for the weekdays. And so like, even with your kids, you kind of making sure that they're within this like 2-hour window of when they wake up is one of the best things that we can do to help make sure you get consistently good sleep day to day.
Hey, Erika.
Yeah.
I think we got John Corliss. So you got your hand up, I think I see up there. Do you want to unmute and ask a question or do you want to type it out? You're muted, John.
Yes. Yeah, I'm fine, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Erika.
Okay. So sleep is such an important thing that we keep regular about. And so not only for like, how are we doing day to day, but it also helps us regulate our emotions, right? So like if we've gotten a good night of sleep and then something doesn't go our way or happens unexpectedly, we're going to be better able to handle it. It might still be upsetting, but at least we'll be able to navigate it a little bit easier if we've slept well and regularly. Other things that we can do, especially this day and age, right, is like we are constantly in tune with like what is happening in the world and with our, with our friends and the people around us. And so kind of setting limits on when you access that information can be really helpful. Our brains weren't meant to like know everything at all times. And so we really benefit from having these periods of, of decompressing. So at the very least, kind of limiting what you're looking at before you go to sleep at night. If there's something that is just kind of makes you feel irritated, and maybe it's important to your job, kind of like setting a time where you feel like I can best handle this in this moment rather than just having free access to it can be really helpful. And then as social beings, humans, we really love to connect with other people. So even if it's just spending time or making a phone call with somebody, just kind of having that connection. And that's one of the things that's made COVID with all the restrictions so challenging is that we really lost this kind of lifeline that we have. And so finding ways to bring that into your life, if you're having to be, a little bit more mindful and things like that about where you're going and who you're spending time with, even, giving a phone call, doing a FaceTime, things like that can help you feel, just kind of help you better handle stress that comes up. And then the other smallest thing that you can do is really just making sure that you're doing at least something that you enjoy each day, especially in those particularly stressful times where like maybe a lot of things are just like not going great. And it doesn't have to be anything big, right? It could be like you eat your favorite cereal for breakfast and like that's great. Maybe you're a big pancake person and like that's what's going to do it for you, right? Or maybe it's just like walking your dog or snuggling at the end of the day. Like those are all things that can help you fill that bucket, so that way you can better handle what comes your way. Another good thing kind of related to this is to just like keep a gratitude journal. So writing down at the end of each day, or even if you don't write it down, just in your mind, like reflecting on the things that have gone well, right? Like I really handled this situation well, or it was really kind that somebody did this, or, things like that, because that can help change the focus to the things that are going to make you feel better. Other things that you can do to kind of help in these stressful periods are to do the things that you enjoy, right? So like a lot of times we spend time waiting for us to feel like doing something before we go out and do it. But what we actually know is once we start doing something, usually the feeling catches up. This is especially true when we're like feeling anxious or like down about something, like, I'm too tired to go out with my friend, right? But what actually ends up happening is once you spend time with your friend, it's like, oh, okay, I feel much better, right? Even if it gives you a moment of relief. And so we want to be able to do those things, even when, it takes a lot of energy to overcome that. If you have a lot of things on your plate that you just have to tackle and get through, you want to make a to-do list, right? And so like we often, always have things running through our minds, but then we're constantly, when it's just in our minds and not like written down somewhere, whether it's on actual paper or like in our phones, is we spend a lot of energy thinking like, okay, did I already think of that? I have to go to the grocery store. I have to help this kid with this, or, that. If that's just running through our minds, it just kind of rumbles around in there. And so we also are spending time of saying like, whoa, did I remember to do that? Right. And so if you write it down, you can cross it off. It doesn't have to take up space in your brain.
Like Erika, in today's world where we are so much, I guess you can say, with the phone, we're always accessible on phone. We're always accessible through, it's like 24/7. You're at work a lot of times, you feel like. And the things that we do kind of just, we've got to get this done. We've got to go to the grocery store. We got to, pick up the dry cleaning and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So would you suggest everybody, to start? I mean, we all have the iPhones that for the most part, or a Samsung that has that notes section, that to-do list in our reminders. Yeah. That'd be a good thing for us to just kind of write down in there, hey, I need to do my homework tonight, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I know I've heard you say many times you need somebody to do that, to write that down.
Yeah. And and that's exactly right. And you want to do it kind of right when that, if you can, like right when that thought pops into your head, right? Because it's going to take less time to spend the 5 seconds typing it out than to like hold it in your mind until like, oh, I have a good second. If you're kind of funny like me, I use sticky notes still, but I'll stick them to the back of my phone because like I just don't remember to look in my notes section. So you also have to know what works for you. I need that like physical reminder of like, okay, here's my list to help keep me on track. I've tried in my phone, but that didn't work for me, but it works for a lot of people. And so like kind of, being able to be flexible and try out different things to find what's ideal for you, but so that you're not having to constantly remember things that are, not important to the task you're doing in the moment.
Sticky notes is good. I have to go back to that.
Yeah. And related to that, so bigger things like being able to break things down into really small steps. Sometimes what happens, and I'll, like, for example, I have a giant note pile that I have to write currently. That's, bigger than I would hope to be. And so for me, it's like, today I'm going to write 3 notes, right? So this is a very small step that I know feels achievable and is doable and that I can do. And it's still going to get me closer to that goal of like getting rid of that note pile, right? So like finding that thing for you, if it's like, you know, you have to make a whole bunch of phone calls for the, you know, I don't know what you guys do day to day, upcoming season or something like that, kind of breaking it down. It's like, okay, I have 50 calls to make. Today I can do 5. And like, that's going to be good. That's going to help me. And so being able to break that down into a really small step. Sometimes on the day, depending on the day, the step is as small as like, I'm going to pick up the phone and dial 2 numbers and see if the rest follow, right? And so like really kind of knowing where you are for a day or in a moment can be helpful too. And then when it comes to things that you don't like and that you're able to kind of do this for is like setting time limits, right? So like if you know you have to clean up the living room before you go to bed, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to clean it for 10 minutes. I know I can do 10 minutes. When the timer goes off, whatever's done is done. I don't have to do more unless I choose to, but it's still going to be a step towards meeting that bigger goal. And then one of the other things that can help us too is really knowing the difference between like what is a worry and what's a problem, right? So sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking about things that we can't do anything about, right? So like, you know, what's going to happen if I don't win this, you know, competition coming up? Like, there's not really much we can do about that outside of, you know, practicing or whatever it may be. And so then that's just taking up a mental space. And so sometimes it's helpful to just write that down, that worry down, and say like, I'm worried about how well this is going to go. And then coming back to it, right? So what I'll often tell kids is like, set aside a worry time each day, right? So like after school, you're going to come back, you're going to pull all these pieces of paper or like the notes of the worries, and you're going to look at them and say like, okay, I'm going to worry about this now. And a lot of times you'll find that like, oh, I don't actually need to worry about this because this isn't a big deal, right? And then the things that you do worry about, you've given it time, and then you kind of toss it to the side. Versus the things that you can do things about, you know, it's kind of like, okay, well, I need to get this, like I got to call this many people, and then I have to, you know, fundraise this much money or whatever it is. And so kind of what are the action steps of the things that you can do? You also don't want to multitask. And so I don't mean like, you know, like talking on the phone and sweeping at the same time, let's say, for example, right? This is more of like when you are doing something, like not letting your mind wander off to other things like that to-do list or things like that. You really want to keep your focus on what's happening in the moment, because that will make you more efficient and better able to do it. And your mind is going to wander because that's what it does, but it's being able to catch yourself and saying like, okay, nope, I'm focusing on cleaning this up right now. Let's come back to think about what's coming next. Something that can help do that is starting up a mindfulness practice. And it doesn't, you know, I think mindfulness sometimes gets a bad rap as being kind of, I don't know, fluffy is the word that's coming to mind at the moment. But really all it means is like, we're just not letting too many things influence how we're doing. We're focused on what's happening, paying attention right now on purpose to what's going on around us. And so an easy way to kind of practice that is to do something simple and just really focus on that experience. So one I often give it as an example is like brushing your teeth every day, right? So it's very tempting to like, while you're brushing your teeth, think about like, okay, I got to get dressed, and then I got to go get breakfast, and I got to drop the kids off, and like all of these different things. But instead you're just going to focus on like, okay, what does the toothpaste taste like? How does the brush feel on my teeth? Things like that. So you're really, for these short periods of time, focused on what's going on. And then more you do that, that's going to carry you over to the other tasks where like really paying attention matters. And then when you're feeling overwhelmed or angry, taking a break, right? So like, again, going back to that and just naming and knowing what you're feeling, taking a break, regrouping, doing things that's going to bring you back to where you are, taking some deep breaths, doing something active, changing your scenery, things like that, or just putting a check on yourself and the facts of what's around you, right? So noticing I'm having this thought that this person doesn't like me. It's like, well, no, they're frustrated because, you know, their payment was overdue. And so like, that's why they're snappy, right? So kind of like putting that check on what's happening. So that way you can take better control of the situation. With deep breaths, the reason that this is important is that stress and anxiety can make us breathe really shallowly. So kind of into just our upper parts of the lungs. And so then we're not getting as much oxygen to the rest of our body. And so we want to take these deep belly breaths where we're filling up our full lung capacity. So that way we're maximizing the oxygen that we get to the rest of our body, which is going to help us both physically, but also kind of mentally being able to handle whatever it is. And like one deep breath can go really far. And so I think you'll see a lot of athletes or people like that kind of taking time to do that before they, take the big shot or things like that. Right.
So what are the things that we want to
Yeah.
avoid doing when we're in these situations?
Yeah, so excellent thought. So the things that we want to avoid are ignoring our feelings, right? So like, it doesn't do you any good to be feeling frustrated, but to say like, I'm not mad about that, because you are, and like that's okay. The more we push back against those feelings, the more space that they're going to take up, and it's going to start to impact the things that we do. You also don't want to isolate yourself. And again, this kind of goes back to that stigma that we hope is getting better over time, but it's okay to ask for help. If you're trying to tackle something challenging, even if it seems like something small on your own, it's going to be a lot harder because you're also kind of dealing with that, like, I don't know, shame or guilt that like you can't handle it. When really, I mean, I'm sure any of you would say like if a friend reached out to, because they needed help, like you would happily show up to like help them out. And that's, true the other way around too. Like you are also deserving of that help if you need it. Jumping to conclusions, right? So that kind of goes with the other one of like checking the facts. So making sure that, just because you're seeing something that's happening, you want to make sure that it's, the logic kind of adds up, right? And so sometimes our emotions run away from us and we like come up with reasons or we make assumptions that aren't true. And then other things you want to do are avoid risky behaviors, right? So like using drugs or alcohol, overeating or undereating. And really that's because those aren't going to solve the problems. Those are just going to kind of give you temporary relief, but they're still going to be remaining there afterwards, right? And so like the more effective way to cope with them is to deal with the problem itself so that way it doesn't build over time. I think a lot of these strategies that we want to avoid are hard to avoid because you kind of see immediate relief from them, right? So like if you don't talk about your problems, you don't have to feel the distress that comes with your problems. But as we talked about, right, like that's just going to make it build and last over time. And so it's kind of like more pain long-term, right? Whereas like if you went to go and talk with somebody about it or solve the problem, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. We'll get all
But even like that your alcohol, especially your alcohol, but it hurts your sleep and then causes issues with sleeping, and even eating too close to when you go to bed causes us those problems, which then of course makes our sleep worse.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even think about that when I was putting this together, but absolutely, right? And like, it's going to change the way you eat in general, like the choices you might make too. And so like you might not be getting the same like sustenance that you need, and then definitely going to impact your sleep cycles.
Erika, do you find that these risky behaviors you're talking about, like, do you find that they are sort of subtle in that they're increasing almost imperceptibly because you're not thinking about it, and then they just gradually snowball? It's not like to take alcohol, for example, it's not like you're just grabbing the whole bottle right away, but you're just adding a drink or two, and then all of a sudden it just starts snowballing.
Yep, definitely. Right. And it kind of goes back to that, like, you have, let's say you have a glass of wine or a beer at the end of your day, and it's like, oh, okay, this was, I got some relief for that. That feels good. Right. And as the problems get better, you might say like, okay, well, I felt relief from that the last time I had one. So like, what harm could a second one do? And so like, you're totally right. It's not like an overnight change. It's something that kind of increases as time goes. And then, it's hard to see where you're at, right? Until it becomes like a big problem. And so, not saying that you can't drink because that's unreasonable for a lot of people, right? But just kind of being mindful about why is it that you're choosing that, right? Is it to like, because you enjoy the taste, or is it because like, I'm trying to not think about something? And like that latter case is the one that's a little bit more problematic. Let's see. All right, this is just another like, kind of short summary of the things that you can do to help yourselves out, right? So like having kind of boundaries between work and home, which I think is hard for the work from home life a lot of times, having that routine, getting activities done, things like that. But then what happens when it's more than just stress, right? So it's happening more than just a situation would call for, right? So like we're consistently feeling anxious about things when we don't necessarily need to. We're worrying more often. So anxiety disorders are pretty common. I use generalized anxiety as the example here, but there's other kinds of anxiety that people might have, right? So there's social anxiety where you're having trouble hanging out, spending time with others, meeting new people, things like that. OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, where you're having to, do certain rituals so that you're preventing harm or bad things from happening. That doesn't make sense logically, that, but it kind of feels like it does, or lots of different other kinds of things like that. When we're talking about what makes it anxiety a problem, like a disorder and a problem, and not just, what we would normally feel, we're kind of looking for this set of things. So it's occurring more days than not for an extended period of time. So 6 months. The worry is more so than what the situation would call for. It feels hard to control or stop. And then it comes along with 3 physical symptoms. And so that could be the restlessness, trouble sleeping, concentration, being irritable, things like that. And then the key from a psychologist perspective, or somebody that you would be seeking help from, is like, what is it getting in the way of, right? So has it gotten in the way of, being able to connect with others? You're not doing your job as well. Your home life is really struggling, things like that. Because anxiety here and there, not such a big deal. We all, like I said, it's kind of a helpful thing to have, but like if it's starting to get in the way of your activities, then it's something to kind of tackle. Anxiety is also very common. So 1 in 5 adults is going to experience high levels of anxiety. And so also knowing that it's not an unusual experience to have. So these are kind of what the rates of anxiety look like, both for adults and for our teens. And as you can see, especially for our teens, it's that rather than 1 in 5, it's almost 1 in 3 teens are experiencing high levels of anxiety. And I would guess that this data is from 2004, but my guess is that's probably a little bit higher, especially these last 2 years too. So just knowing that like our kids are struggling a lot of the times. And so just knowing that that's the case to keep an eye out for. Another problem that we could encounter that's not anxiety, but they're, kind of cousins here, is depression. And so that would be when your mood is low, you're sad, you're irritable. This is one of the key ones, is loss of interest or pleasure in things that you usually enjoy, along with some of these changes to other systems in our body. So our appetite, sleeping, restlessness, fatigue. And what we look for to kind of classify as like a full depressive episode would be that this is happening every day for nearly the whole day for 2 straight weeks, right? So you could have these problems for like shorter periods of time, or like, in the morning, but then, once your day is going, you're kind of feeling okay. And that wouldn't necessarily count for a diagnosis. Obviously, we'd still want to work on that. But again, we're looking for that interference in various areas of our lives. In our kids and teens, depression doesn't always it can look like sad mood, but it also often looks like irritability, right? So if your child or someone that you're working with all of a sudden is just like much more irritable and cranky than usual, that could be a sign that something else is going on. Depression is also fairly common, and even higher among our teens as well too. And this is recent data, so I think this probably came out right before COVID hit, but I would imagine, again, kind of would expect it to be a little bit higher given the last 2 years. And the other thing to know about depression too is like if you've had one depressive episode in your past, so whether that was in your teens or early adulthood or things like that, you're more likely to have another one. So depression is kind of cyclical. It kind of comes, it goes, it comes and goes. And so just knowing that, having that past history makes you a little bit more likely to have another episode is helpful information. I don't want to bring down the tone of this talk, but a really important topic is that suicide and suicidal thoughts or thoughts about death are also fairly common. And as you can see in our young adults and teens is the second leading cause of death. And so obviously it's something that we really want to know what to do if this were to happen, right? And I don't know how often you all are dealing with, especially with our teens, but with things like that is kind of, if you're suspicious that somebody is having these thoughts, we want to know that that's the case so that way we can get help. I think a lot of people think like, oh, if I were to ask, are you thinking of harming yourself or killing yourself, you're going to plant that idea. But what we know is that that's not the case. You can't give the idea of suicide to someone who's not already thinking about it. And it's better to know if they are, so that way you can take some actions. These are also things, the rates of suicide have been increasing over the last 20 years too. So I think it's starting to become more prevalent. And so we want to, nobody wants to kind of have these conversations, but you want to know what to do if that's something you're suspicious of. And so a good way to go about this, if you're worried that like a friend or your child or, you know, somebody that you're working with is having these thoughts, is just to ask them, say, I've noticed XYZ, it seems like you're feeling pretty down. I'm wondering if you're feeling hopeless. Have you had any thoughts of wanting to take your life? And like, they will tell you if that's the case, right? And they will definitely tell you if it's not the case. And you know, you'll be able to tell kind of how truthful they are. But in my experience, asking this question, people don't usually lie about their answers, right? If they're thinking about it, it's going to be obvious. And then if they are thinking about it, what we want to talk about is like, how do we keep them safe, right? And so the number one way is to ask them, what are you thinking of? And then you can remove the means, right? So if they're thinking of, well, you know, my dad has a gun, it's like, okay, well, let's get your dad, let's remove that, you know, things like that, so we can take away the method. Because most people, if they're having thoughts of suicide and they have a plan, don't often have a backup plan. So it is what it is. And if you're really, truly concerned about their safety, call 911, take them to the emergency room, you know, let's keep them safe. All right, on to lighter subjects.
Well, a lot of us teach kids. And I mean, you know, the kids, obviously, there's areas there where, you know, parents have gotten divorced and there's issues there with that side of it, that they're now split up between parents, and in a way, you know, they're you know, having difficulty trying to, you know, in a way they have to choose, or, you know, they feel like they have to choose. And that's something that I know from, you know, experiences that, you know, from I coached high school basketball for a little bit, and we had a situation where a young lady was just struggling just because of that situation. So a lot of times just asking that question, it's a hard question to ask. Sometimes you feel like you're doing something wrong, but not wrong. It's something you need to ask and check with that person to see how they're feeling.
Yep, 100%. And actually, probably as their coaches, they might feel more comfortable coming to you with some of these thoughts, right, than maybe their parent or somebody else. And so, like, you know, it kind of puts you in a different seat. And so it's not comfortable for anybody. Like, I hate when I have to ask that question. I ask it fairly, probably on a pretty regular basis, I would imagine. But it's always better to know, because if you don't know, you can't take any actions to help. So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I know we just had Mark kind of mentioned, Mark Lynch kind of say that in the chat there, that, I mean, it's a tough situation, it's a tough discussion, but it's not discussed enough. And I mean, right. You know, we have, you know, some people are working with men and, you know, I won't say boys and girls that are kind of underprivileged, and you know, their life isn't the, you know, mom and dad at home, you know, and helping them with their homework and stuff. They're on their own a lot. And, you know, it's some of those situations that, to help them out of that situation, you just need to talk to them, because you are their lifeline. You are their coach.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you know, you can always like frame it too. Like, I don't want to ask you this question but I care so much about you that I need to know the answer. Like, is this something that you're thinking about? And like,
Erika.
Good way.
Yeah, it's not going to plant the idea. I think that's what a lot of people get nervous about.
Erika, just a quick question for you, because you mentioned in looking at the stats and stuff too, but how do you, just your thought in general on tying all this stuff to the added weight, if you will, of social media on our kids, and how some, you know, it's like, you know, a lot of us didn't grow up with social media really in our formative years. Maybe a few people on this call did, but most of us, you know, it's like you left it at school and then you came home and maybe you dealt with it on your own. But the kids now, and I mean, I even see it with my 10-year-old, it's ever present. And they have a tendency to tie their self-worth sometimes to likes and followers and all that stuff, right? And I try and explain to them, it's like, look, really doesn't mean anything, but it still affects them tremendously. So can you just touch on that a little bit? Because it's a whole added, you know, bag of stuff we have to deal with as parents and coaches.
Yeah. So I mean, so much there. So I think, and you know, so for our teens and our like, you know, our middle schoolers, right? They're kind of going through this developmental shift where when they're kids, like mom and dad or whoever the important caregivers are kind of the number one, you know, influence in their lives and who they care most about. And then as they enter their teen years, right, that totally changes to like, now what my friends think of me is what matters most, right? And so like having access to social media in this period, right, where you're getting this like pretty instant feedback of likes and things like that, is meeting kids at a pretty interesting time in their development in general. And so I think, you know, talking with your kids about like, well, what do people post on social media, right? It doesn't tend to be the things that are like, you know, sad or like irritating or like, you know, that's kind of this very sunny picture of what's happening and it's just a moment, right? And even for any given picture, right, we don't know how many times they took that before they found the perfect one. And so really just reminding kids that like, you know, we're just seeing this one tiny moment that somebody has chosen to show the world. And we don't know all else that's kind of going on. And so kind of making sure that we have that good like social media literacy, I would say, is something that's really helpful. Also the degree that you're able as a parent kind of monitoring like, what are they looking at and like how much time are they spending on those different things, right? So like kind of having, you know, maybe it's just like every so often you like go through their phone to kind of see like what accounts are they following, what messages are they receiving, things like that, so that way you can keep tabs on that. And then also I think what I've encountered a lot in my work here is that kids like through like their, you know, the messaging through the different apps and things like that, like have friends that are saying things like, I'm thinking about hurting myself or things like that. And like the kids don't know what to do with that information, right? So like really talking with them to say like, if somebody says something like this, you just come tell me and I will handle it. Or like to help figure out what to do with there. And because I think that, you know, puts kids in a really tricky spot of like, these are some pretty serious thoughts. If somebody does come to them and says like, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to kill myself. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that, right? Like I'm a teenager and I care what you think about me. And I don't want to lose this friendship. But as we know, like we would rather the kid be alive, right, than the friendship lost. But as a teenager, like that's hard to like balance those two things because they just don't have the same kind of frontal lobe power that we do as adults. And so I think the other thing too is just kind of checking on how your kids are feeling when they're looking through social media, right? It's like, how do you feel when you're looking through all these posts? If it starts to make you feel bad and down, and kind of having that self-check of like, okay, that probably means like it's time to turn it off for the day and like, you know, come back to it later, or like setting kind of strict time limits about how much time they're spending on those things are all things that can help.
Thank you.
Erika, will you go into a little bit, because obviously I know this from personal experience a little bit, but the difference between males and females as kids are growing up and how the maturity levels that we've, you know, that I know you and we've talked about a lot. So kind of go over that a little bit.
Yeah. So girls do tend to like mature a little bit quicker than a lot of boys, although that, like, you know, this is to say these are all generalizations, right? So like there's going to be a kid in every category that's going to, you know, break this rule. But in general, those are things to think about. Other things are like, and this is less, well, actually it probably applies to social media too, but like how are kids physically developing, right? So like a boy who, let's say, hits their kind of pubertal growth spurt earlier and like, let's say grows really tall, or like, you know, all the things that happen earlier, sometimes tend to have more social difficulties in those high school years because they look older, right? And so they're like into different situations than, you know, a boy who's younger, who still looks younger. Same thing for girls who mature a little bit quicker, tend to, you know, again, it's just kind of like, how is the world seeing them and what are the opportunities that are presented to them? And so sometimes having somebody who matures a little bit faster physically can have a little bit more difficulties socially, right? There is some payoff to it, right? Because they might actually be more accepted by their peers, but because of that, they might have access to different things that might get them into trouble potentially. Also, if your kids are dealing with any other kinds of challenges, right? So like attention difficulties or like impulsiveness or like depression or anxiety, that's also going to influence kind of how well they're functioning in the world and the decisions they make. And so if those are struggles that your kids are having, being able to tackle them, whether it's like from outside support, like from therapy or medication support, or just increasing monitoring or things like that, are all things that can help. Hopefully I answered that. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, then go to that side too. I mean, when, you know, where do you get help? how,
Yeah.
how does somebody, when you feel like that, obviously calling 911 if it's a suicide situation,
Yeah.
but I mean, if it's just more of, somewhere where, kids are, you feel like you just need to get your child somebody to talk to. I mean, like how
Yeah.
we got introduced to you, what
Yeah.
we did was obviously we talked to John Hopkins and got introduced to you, but how does people do that?
Yeah, and so the same process applies whether it's your kid or for yourself or for a spouse or somebody like that. But really, you have to just start asking around, right? And so, oops, oh, here we go. Oh no, there we go. So the different here, let me reverse this. So where you can find help is through things like your primary care provider, your pediatrician, right? So they can both potentially help with medication, but they also usually have a bank of referrals that they can give you of people that are going to be close to you or that they've worked with in the past or some combination of those. You can always also call your insurance company and ask who is in network for both therapy or psychiatry if medicine's on your mind, but then also using some of the resources around you, right? So like talking to your kid's school is a good one, especially like their counselor or their psychologist that's there, because they usually also have a list of people that they've worked with in the past or that they can connect you with. If you're in any like faith-based communities, oftentimes there's support systems in there that are kind of built in, or even just asking around, right? If you're comfortable kind of talking about it with your like friends or friends of your, or parents of your kids, friends, things like that, kind of saying like, we're struggling with this. Is this something that you've ever encountered? Who have you worked with in the past? Can all be good ways to get into that, to get that kind of help. There are different kinds of support that you can access. So we have medication, right? And so this would be, if you're comfortable with it, there's lots of great medications that are very helpful, especially when it comes to anxiety and depression that we know are safe and work well. A lot of them will say they come with this black box warning of increased suicidal thoughts. But the risk of that is actually very, very, very low, and probably outweighs the benefit of like how you can help overcome that by taking this medication regularly. And usually like, you can take a medication for as long or as little as you'd like. For SSRIs, it does take some time to build up in your system before you start seeing help, but then it kind of, can kind of carry you through until you decide that maybe you want to try something different. When it comes to seeking therapy, you want to look for things that are evidence-based. And all that means is that there have been studies done to see like, does this protocol, does this approach work for the problems that we're encountering? And so the things that we know work really well for anxiety and depression are different, two different kinds of therapy. One's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And really all that means is that we kind of see problems as having three components: the feelings like in your body, the thoughts going through your mind, and then the behaviors. And we're kind of coming up with skills for how to handle each of those. ACT, or acceptance and commitment based therapy, is kind of grew out of CBT, but sometimes it's especially helpful for things when we just have worries that we can't necessarily do things about. But it takes this approach of like, okay, it kind of is what it is. What's important to me in my life, and how can I achieve the goals, even if I'm having these other kinds of difficulties? And I think the other thing, especially when it comes to therapy, is like, this is somebody, as Sean kind of said, that you kind of are bringing into your family. They're going to know a whole lot about you. And so you want to feel comfortable with them. So just because you've met with some person and it didn't work, it could have just been because it was a bad, like personality match, or like you didn't have the same goals or approach to things that you were hoping for. And so you can always try with somebody else because you may find a better fit that way. And then for a lot of things that we know, that doing both of those can be really helpful. So medication and therapy together. Let's see. All right, and then I think this is my almost last slide, so we can, it's 2:00. So hopefully I have some time for some questions, but here are some specific websites that you can check out to get more support. So there are a lot of associations dedicated to these kinds of things. And then I put the suicide hotline on here again. And then Maryland, we're fortunate, they have this firearm safe storage. So like if you're worried that somebody is, thinking of taking their life or hurting somebody else in this way, you can give them this, your weapons or things like that to hold on to, but they're not going to take them permanently. You can get them back. So it's kind of a nice thing that we have here. I couldn't see if it was in Virginia. I don't think so, but I don't know where else everybody else is coming from. But on that note, those are all kind of the big things that I had to talk about. So I have a few extra minutes if we want to spend time for a few more questions, but totally up to you guys.
So yes, if anybody has, we've talked about a lot here today, and I want to thank everybody for hanging on here. And if you have a question specific that you want to ask Dr. Erika, feel free to open your mic and ask the question. What she's here for and what we're here for. All right. So
I'll step
Go ahead.
in here.
Go ahead,
Hey,
Matthew.
hi, Erica. Thanks for being on. I was just wondering, do you ever have discussions of faith with your patients, and has it proven beneficial? And also, why do you think we hesitate on this topic that has been prevalent for literally thousands of years? And have you seen any studies that have proven that those who have some sort of faith basis are generally less likely to be, or are less, some sort of faith basis are generally, more happy and less likely to be self-detrimental?
Yeah, great question. So I will hopefully tackle it all, but chime in if I miss a part of it. But so I think communities of faith can be extremely helpful, and I think it's I think probably the biggest factor. And I don't know the research on this specifically, but I would be surprised if this is not what's there. Is that it gives you a group of people who are kind of like interested in your well-being, right? And so and oftentimes there's a lot of routines and different kinds of in faiths, right? So you're going to church on Sundays, or we have these, celebrations or things like that, where we're often bringing people together. And so just having that contact, I think, is probably one of the things that's most helpful. But then also from just kind of a broader level, right? It's kind of for the existential questions that we might have of well, what happens when we die? Or in these kinds of situations, has an explanation that I think can really sit well with people. I think for the families that I work with, I always ask about what are their beliefs, or what are, spirituality, or, communities that they're involved with, for a few reasons, right? Because sometimes it's helpful to say okay, well, you've told me this, how would this be interpreted, based on your faith or things like that? Or similarly, how can we bring in the communities that you're in to help support you through this challenging time and things like that. So I think, like I said, I don't know the research specifically on that topic area, but I think that that can be incredibly helpful for a lot of people.
Because Erika, that could almost be in a way a stressor if you do not feel like that some of the things that you do in your life don't fit to the ideology of a religion. There might be another religion where you're fine, but then there's sometimes where that kind of can also be a stressor in that regards also. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that that's actually a really important point to make, because we want to, again, getting back to that community piece, it's we want to find where you fit in. And so if you're feeling like you're not accepted by the faith-based community that you have, we want to be able to help find you the group that you can. If the things that you're struggling with, right, are maybe don't fit with the belief system, or whatever it may be, we want to help you find that home where you can get that support that you're looking for.
Any other questions from anybody? All right, we've had some people leave there, and I don't want to take too much of your time today, Doc, because I appreciate, obviously, you know how much we appreciate you and our family. But thank you very much for being part of our day and giving us some great insight there. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. Please make sure, obviously, I know Christine's going to tell me, make sure that everybody gets their member number in there, that she can give you the credit for this, for being here. But thank you, Erika, and I know I will see you soon, or
See you soon.
talk to you soon.
Yeah,
But,
thank you, everybody, for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.